Okay, so you guys sent in a ton of stuff about inspections, regulatory inspections, and how to get ready for them. So
Yeah,
that's what we're going to be looking at today.
it's a big one.
It is a really big one, and we're going to try to help you kind of wade through all this material and get ready for your next inspection. So,
Absolutely.
pharmaceutical and dietary supplement industries, this is for you.
Yeah, we've got a lot to cover today. I mean, the listener sent in a really interesting mix of sources. We've got, the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, with all the detailed legal stuff. And
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking multiple parts here covering everything from how you make your products to clinical trials and beyond.
Right.
And then to give us that more practical kind of on-the-ground perspective,
Yeah.
we've got transcripts from YouTube videos by some really reputable folks like ES Consulting.
Oh, yeah, they're great.
And even the FDA themselves weighing in.
Yeah.
Then, to round it all out, we've got excerpts from some key books on GMP quality auditing, risk management, and even those internationally recognized ICH guidelines.
Nice.
It's a lot.
It is a lot.
So great.
I think our mission today should be to take all of this and distill it down to something really usable for everybody listening, like actionable advice that they can use.
Absolutely.
So to get ready for these inspections and feel really confident.
I think that's the key takeaway here. Like, how do we take all this dense information and turn it into something that people can actually implement in their day-to-day?
Exactly.
No.
So we're going to focus on the most important stuff. First, we got to talk about documentation.
Yes.
It is like the foundation
Absolutely.
of everything.
The backbone.
Right. And then, of course, the people involved.
Yeah.
Got to make sure everyone's properly trained.
Well-trained staff is critical.
And knows their stuff.
Absolutely.
And then we want to talk about, mock audits and why those are so important.
Yeah, these are like your fire drills.
Right, exactly. Like
You practice before the real thing hits.
Right, you don't want to wait till the real inspection to figure out what you're doing.
Right, exactly.
And then a big one is transparency.
Oh, huge.
And communicating effectively.
Being open and honest with the agencies.
With the inspectors, yeah.
It builds trust.
Right, and then finding those gaps, those weaknesses in your systems before they do.
Proactive is the name of the game.
Exactly. And then what to expect when they're actually there.
Yeah. How to handle that interaction smoothly.
And then finally, inspections happen, you get the report, and then what?
Well, that's where the real work begins, using those results to make your system even better.
Continuous improvement.
That's the heart of GMP.
Right. Okay, so even in just glancing through this material, there are some details that are pretty fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. There are some real gems in here.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, you wouldn't think something as simple as where you put fans in your facility would matter that much.
Okay.
But CFR Part 110, it actually lays out some pretty specific requirements. It's all about preventing contamination.
Makes sense.
And then EAS Consulting, they had a really interesting point about reviewing lab data.
Uh-huh.
It's not just about one person checking it at the end.
Right.
They were advocating for like a multi-layered approach. Different people checking at different stages.
Multiple sets of eyes.
More eyes, the better. And it makes sense, when you think about it.
Yeah.
Catching those errors early on can save you a lot of headaches down the line.
For sure. Okay, and then those FDA case studies.
Oh, those are always enlightening.
Yeah, those are fascinating.
They really show you how important it is to have your documentation in order.
Yeah.
I mean, some of those applications were delayed or even rejected because the paperwork was incomplete.
Wow.
Or poorly organized.
So even small things can have a big impact.
Absolutely. The devil's in the details, as they say.
All right, so let's start with the big one, documentation. It's, like I said, it's the foundation.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's not just about having documentation for the sake of having it.
Cool.
It's about the why behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it like this meticulously kept records. They tell a story.
Oh, okay.
They're the story of your commitment to quality.
Okay.
And it starts with the basics, like CFR Part 110 points out.
Mm-hmm.
Your buildings, your fixtures, they have to be in good repair and clean.
Right. Sanitary
Conditions to prevent your products from getting contaminated.
Adulterated.
Exactly. It's all about having a system in place. And that system needs to be documented every step of the way.
Okay, so it's really about having a system and proving that you have a system.
Exactly. You have to be able to demonstrate that you're in control.
Okay.
That you're following a plan, and that plan is designed to ensure quality.
And so that's where the documentation comes in.
That's where the documentation comes in. It's your proof.
Okay, so let's get specific then. Like CFR Part 211 talks about equipment.
Right.
It's not enough to just clean your equipment. You have to have a written procedure.
Absolutely. You need to spell out exactly how it's done,
Okay.
who's responsible, and how often you do it.
Right, and this is to prevent contamination.
Exactly. It's all about minimizing the risk of something getting into your product that shouldn't be there.
And I'm guessing this is the same kind of thing that Blazner talks about in his book.
Oh, absolutely. Blazner really emphasizes the importance of written procedures
Yeah.
for production and process control.
Uh-huh.
He argues that these procedures are your guarantee that every product you make meets the required standards.
The identity, strength, quality, and purity.
Exactly. And these aren't just suggestions.
Right.
These procedures need to be carefully reviewed and approved.
By quality control.
By quality control. Exactly. To make sure that every step is scientifically sound and consistently followed.
Okay, so it's not just like some random person writing this down. This has to be vetted.
Absolutely. It has to be a control document.
All right, so we've got our building, we've got our equipment. What about when the product's all made? Where do we put it?
Warehousing. That's another area where documentation is key. CFR Part 211, it's very clear you need written procedures for how you store your products. The conditions, the temperature, humidity, all of that.
Right.
And even how you rotate your stock.
Okay, so that things don't expire.
Exactly. You don't want to end up with expired materials or products that have degraded because they weren't stored properly.
So this is all about preventing loss and waste as well.
Absolutely. It's about protecting your investment and ensuring the quality of your products right up until they reach the customer.
Okay, so Bleisner also mentions that these records have to be readily available.
Oh, yeah. You don't want to be scrambling when the inspector shows up.
Right.
They ask for a document. You need to be able to pull it out quickly and easily.
It makes sense. Okay, so now we're talking about like the history of the product, like how it was made.
Traceability. That's the key word.
Okay.
CFR Part 111, it specifically requires you to be able to trace the entire journey of your dietary supplements.
Okay, from beginning to end.
From raw materials to finished product, you need to know where everything came from and where it went.
And this is all documented.
All documented every step of the way.
So how do we actually do that? Like, how do we keep track of all this information?
Well, think of it like a recipe. You know, when you bake a cake, you follow a recipe. In pharmaceutical manufacturing, that recipe is called the Master Production and Control Record.
Okay.
It lays out every single ingredient, every step, every parameter.
So it's incredibly detailed.
Incredibly detailed. It's the blueprint for making your product.
Wow. And then each time you make a batch of the product.
You create a batch production record.
Okay.
And that record documents everything that happened during that specific production run.
So it's like a logbook for that particular batch.
Exactly. And it shows that you followed the master recipe, and it also documents any deviations that might have occurred.
Okay, so if something unexpected happened, you write it down.
You write it down, and you explain why it happened and what you did about it.
Okay, so it's not just about following the rules, it's also about explaining when you didn't follow the rules.
Exactly, and why and what you did to correct the situation.
Okay, so these records are really important.
Absolutely, it's there. You're proof that you're operating in a controlled and consistent manner.
Okay, so we've talked about the product itself. Let's go back to those raw materials and how we control those.
Material control and traceability, another critical area. And again, documentation is key.
Okay.
CFR Part 211 requires you to have written procedures for everything you do with your components and containers.
Okay, so like receiving them, storing them, testing them.
All of that. Every single step needs to be documented.
Okay, so you have to have a procedure for literally everything.
Pretty much. And for dietary supplements, CFR Part 111 adds another layer of complexity.
Oh, how so?
Well, they require you to have a unique identifier for every single lot of incoming ingredients.
Okay, so even within a shipment.
Even within a shipment, every lot needs to be individually identifiable.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
It is, but it's necessary for traceability.
Yeah.
You know, if there's ever a problem, you need to be able to track it back to the specific lot of material.
Okay, and then what about storing these materials? Like, how do we make sure they're not contaminated?
Again, CFR Part 111 has you covered.
Okay.
You need documented procedures for how you receive and hold your raw materials. This includes everything from the conditions in your warehouse to how you prevent mix-ups and contamination.
So it's all about protecting the integrity of your ingredients.
Exactly. You're building quality in from the very beginning.
Okay, and then what happens if you get a shipment of materials and some of it's bad?
Rejects.
Rejects.
Yeah, that's covered too.
Okay.
CFR Part 111 requires you to have strict procedures for identifying, holding, and controlling any rejected materials.
Okay, so this would include components, packaging labels.
Anything that doesn't meet your standards.
And why is that so important?
Well, you want to make sure that those rejected materials don't accidentally end up in your product.
Right, so you need to keep them separate.
Separate and clearly identified.
Okay, so you don't want to mix good stuff with bad stuff. Exactly. You need to have a system in place, a quarantine system to prevent any mix-ups.
Okay, so this is all about containing the problem.
Containing the problem and preventing it from spreading.
Okay, makes sense.
Oh.
All right, so now let's move on to the lab.
The lab. The heart of quality control.
Right, so what kind of documentation do we need there?
Well, the EAS consulting group, they had a lot to say about this in their video.
Uh-huh.
They really emphasized the need for strong systems to control and review all of your lab data.
Okay, so making sure it's accurate and precise.
Exactly. You want to be confident in your data.
Right.
And they really stress the importance of having multiple layers of review.
Oh, interesting. So not just one person checking the data.
No, not just one person. The analyst who generates the data, they review it, of course.
Okay.
But then their peers review it, and then a supervisor reviews it.
Okay, so it's like a triple check.
Exactly. It's about building in those checks and balances.
Makes sense. And what's the thinking behind that?
Well, it's not just about catching errors.
It's about fostering a culture of shared responsibility.
Uh-huh.
Everyone understands that data integrity is critical.
Right.
And everyone has a role to play in ensuring that data is accurate and reliable.
Okay, so it's a team effort.
Absolutely.
Right.
And the EAS Consulting Group also talked about the importance of managing that data appropriately.
Okay, so what does that mean?
It means eliminating transcription errors.
So being careful when you're copying data from one place to another?
Exactly. And it means tracking the data throughout its life cycle.
Okay, so knowing where it is, who has access to it.
Exactly. And then finally, it means archiving the data securely.
Okay, and are there any specific requirements for how long you have to keep lab data?
Yes, there are. And they vary depending on the type of data.
Okay.
But for example, serious adverse events related to dietary supplements, those records have to be kept for at least 6 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
It is, but it's important to have that historical data available if you ever need it.
Okay, so we've got ES Consulting talking about this. What about the other sources?
Well, the PCB transcript, they also touched on lab documentation.
Okay.
They emphasized the need for a second person to review and sign off on all lab records.
So again, that idea of multiple checks.
Exactly. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1.
Right. And then what about ES Consulting? Did they have anything else to add?
Yes, they did. They talked about the importance of having separate tracks for investigating out-of-specification results.
Okay, so when a test result doesn't meet the expected specifications.
Exactly. They said you need to have separate procedures for analytical investigations.
Okay.
And microbiological investigations.
Because the approach is different.
Exactly. You're looking for different things.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the what of documentation, but what about the how?
The practicalities.
Yeah, like, are there any best practices that people should keep in mind when they're creating and maintaining these records?
Oh, absolutely. And the Advancing Health transcript, they had some great advice on this.
Okay, I'm ready.
First, they emphasized the importance of legible handwriting.
Oh, that's a big one.
You don't want your records to be unreadable.
Right.
And they also said you should always include your printed name and the date along with your signature.
Okay, so it's clear who wrote what and when.
Exactly. And speaking of signatures, they were very clear about this. You should always sign and date every single entry personally.
Okay.
And you should include your credentials if appropriate.
Okay, so if you're a chemist or a quality control manager or whatever.
Exactly. You want to make it clear what your qualifications are.
Okay. And they also cautioned against using date stamps.
Yeah, they said that date stamps can be problematic.
How so?
Well, because they don't provide that personal accountability.
Right. So someone could just stamp a bunch of documents without actually reviewing them.
Exactly. It's better to handwrite the date and sign your name.
Okay, so it's more about that personal touch.
Exactly. It shows that you were actually there.
Yeah.
And that you reviewed the information.
Okay. And then what about timeliness? Like how soon after something happens should you document it?
Ideally immediately.
Okay.
But certainly within 24 hours.
Okay, so don't let things pile up.
No, don't wait until the end of the week to try and remember everything that happened.
Right. And then what about this idea of verifiability?
Yes. Every entry you make in a record has to be verifiable.
Okay, so what does that mean?
It means that there has to be a source document that supports your entry.
Okay, so you can't just make things up.
No, you need to have evidence to back up what you're writing.
Okay. And that source document could be what?
It could be a lab report, a batch record, an observation you made during an inspection.
Okay, so anything that can prove that what you're writing is true.
Exactly. And it's important to keep those source documents organized and accessible.
Right, so you can easily find them if you need them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then what about making copies of documents?
Ah, yes, that's something that happens all the time.
It does. And the Easy Global Training transcript, they had some good advice on this.
Okay, let's hear it.
First of all, they said that copies need to be legible.
Okay, so no blurry, faded copies.
No, you want to be able to read the information on the copy.
Right.
And they also said that you shouldn't introduce any errors during the copying process.
Okay, so be careful.
Be careful, double check your work.
And they also recommended a page numbering system.
Yeah, they said you should use a system like page X of Y.
Okay, so it's clear that you have all the pages.
Exactly. And they were very clear about this. You should never eliminate pages from a document.
Okay, so even if there's a mistake on a page.
Even if there's a mistake, you have to keep the page.
And why is that?
Well, because it's a record of what happened.
Yeah, okay.
You can't just erase history.
Right, you can't pretend it didn't happen.
Exactly. And they also talked about the importance of a logbook.
Okay, so this is a separate document.
Yes, a logbook is used to capture the signatures and initials of everyone who's interacted with the product.
Okay, so it's like a chain of custody.
Exactly. It shows who had access to the product and when.
Okay, so if there's ever a question about who did what, you can look it up in the logbook.
Exactly. It's a valuable tool for traceability.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about documentation, and that's great, but documents are just pieces of paper if you don't have the right people to create them, review them, and follow them.
Absolutely. People are just as important as the paperwork.
Okay, so let's talk about personnel training and qualifications.
All right, so this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because as CFR Part 212 and one of our Season 2 transcripts point out, it's not enough to just have procedures written down.
Right.
You have to have people who are qualified to carry out those procedures.
Okay, so you need a skilled and knowledgeable team.
Exactly. You need people who understand the regulations and who have the experience to apply them in a real-world setting.
And how do you make sure you have those people?
Well, it starts with hiring the right people.
Okay, so looking at their education, their background, their experience.
Exactly. But it doesn't stop there.
Right, because things change.
Things change, and people need to stay up to date.
So ongoing training is crucial.
Absolutely. You need to have a robust training program that covers all aspects of GMP.
And one of our Season 6 transcripts pointed out that the competence of your personnel directly impacts the quality of your product.
Absolutely. It's a direct link.
So if you have well-trained people...
They're more likely to have high-quality product.
And if you have poorly trained people...
You're more likely to have problems.
Right. And those problems can lead to...
recalls, warning letters, all sorts of bad things.
Okay, so training is not just a nice-to-have, it's a must-have.
It's a critical part of your quality system.
And how do the inspectors assess whether your people are properly trained?
Well, they do it through interviews.
Okay, so they'll actually sit down with your employees and ask them questions.
Exactly, and they'll be listening for certain things.
Like what?
Well, they'll be listening to see if the employee understands the procedures,
Okay.
if they can explain them in their own words.
Right.
And they'll also be looking to see if the training has actually translated into the employee's daily work practices.
Okay, so it's not just about knowing the theory, it's about applying it in practice.
Exactly, and they might ask the employee to describe what they would do if they encountered an unexpected situation.
Okay, so they're really trying to gauge the depth of the employee's understanding.
Exactly. They want to know if the employee can think critically and solve problems.
And this all goes back to those written procedures we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. Those procedures are the foundation.
And the training is what brings them to life.
Exactly. It's the bridge between the theory and the practice.
Okay, so we've talked about documentation. We've talked about training now. Let's talk about how to proactively identify any gaps in your quality system before the inspectors find them.
Yes, the art of the mock audit.
Okay, so what exactly is a mock audit?
Well, it's basically a simulated inspection.
Okay, so you're pretending to be the inspector?
Exactly. You're putting yourself in the inspector's shoes, and you're looking at your operations with a critical eye.
And why is this so important?
Well, as Steinborn points out in one of the book excerpts, internal audits are an invaluable tool for self-assessment. They allow you to step back and evaluate your own compliance with the regulations and your own internal standards.
So it's a chance to find your own weaknesses before someone else does.
Exactly, and to fix them before they become a problem.
And one of our Season 6 transcripts mentioned that mock audits can help you identify potential deviations from both the regulations and your own procedures.
Absolutely. It's a chance to see if you're actually following the rules that you've set for yourself.
And I'm guessing that this proactive approach is really important.
It's critical. You don't want to wait for the FDA to tell you that you're doing something wrong.
Right. You want to find it and fix it yourself.
Exactly. It's about being proactive and taking ownership of your quality system.
Okay, so mock audits are a great way to find those gaps, but how do they fit into the bigger picture of GMP?
Well, mock audits are a vital part of the continuous improvement cycle.
Okay.
They provide you with feedback on how your systems are actually working. And you can use that feedback to make changes and improve your operations.
So it's not just about finding problems. It's about using those problems to make things better.
Exactly. It's about learning from your mistakes
Yeah.
and constantly striving to improve.
And the PECB transcript we looked at, they talked about the importance of investigating discrepancies.
Yes, they said that you should investigate any unexplained discrepancies or failures to meet specifications.
Okay, so if something goes wrong, you don't just shrug it off. You try to figure out why it happened.
Exactly. You dig deep, you find the root cause.
And then you put measures in place to prevent it from happening again.
That's the essence of corrective and preventative action.
Okay, so mock audits can be a great way to test your ability to investigate and correct problems.
Absolutely. You can use mock audits to simulate different scenarios.
Okay, so you might stage a mock recall or a mock contamination event.
Exactly. And then you can see how your team responds.
Okay, so it's like a fire drill.
Exactly. You're practicing for the real thing.
Okay, so we've talked about preparation. We've talked about finding those gaps now. Let's talk about what happens when the inspector actually shows up.
All right, so now we're in the hot seat.
Right, so what's the most important thing to keep in mind during an inspection?
I would say transparency and communication.
Okay, so being open and honest with the inspector.
Exactly. Don't try to hide anything.
Right, because they're going to find it anyway.
They will, and it will look a lot worse if you try to cover it up.
Okay, so be upfront and be honest.
Exactly. And the Advancing Health transcript, they emphasize the importance of maintaining honesty and accuracy in all your reporting.
Okay.
So don't fudge the numbers. Don't try to make things look better than they are.
Right, just tell the truth.
Tell the truth and be prepared to back it up with documentation.
And they also talked about this idea of being willing to be monitored and audited.
Yeah, that's important too.
Okay, so don't be defensive.
No, don't be defensive, be cooperative.
Okay, so the inspector is not your enemy.
No, they're there to help you improve your operations.
Okay, so you should view the inspection as an opportunity.
An opportunity to learn and grow.
Okay, and what if the inspector does find some issues?
Well, then they'll issue you a Form 483.
Okay, and what is a Form 483?
It's basically a list of the inspector's observations.
Okay, so it's not a formal finding of a violation.
Not necessarily. The FDA will review the 483 and decide whether to take further action.
Okay, so it's like a warning.
It can be seen as a warning, but it's also an opportunity to correct the issues.
Okay, so what should you do if you receive a 483?
Well, the FDA's own clinical investigator training course materials, they have some excellent advice on this.
Okay, I'm listening.
First of all, they recommend that you submit a written response to the 483.
Okay, so you don't just ignore it.
No, you don't ignore it. You take it seriously.
And why is it so important to respond?
Well, it shows the FDA that you acknowledge the observations and that you're committed to taking corrective action.
Okay, so it's about demonstrating that you're taking it seriously.
Exactly. And it also gives you a chance to provide any additional information or context that might be helpful.
Okay, so you can tell your side of the story.
Exactly. And the training materials, they lay out some specific elements that should be included in your response.
Okay, let's hear it.
So first of all, you need to address each observation individually.
Okay.
And for each observation, you need to state whether you agree or disagree.
Okay.
If you agree, then you need to outline your plan for corrective action.
Okay, so your CAPA plan.
Exactly. And your CAPA plan should include any actions that you've already taken,
Okay.
when those actions were completed, and your plans for future actions.
Okay, so you need to be specific.
Be specific and include realistic timelines.
Right, you can't just say you'll fix it someday.
No, you need to have a concrete plan with deadlines.
And you also need to explain how you'll verify that your actions were effective.
Absolutely. You need to be able to prove that you fixed the problem.
Okay, and what about if you disagree with an observation?
Then you have the right to present your own evidence and rationale.
Okay, so you can challenge the inspector's findings.
Yes, but you need to do it respectfully and professionally.
Right, so no yelling or name-calling.
No, stick to the facts and present your case clearly and calmly.
Okay, and how long do you have to submit your response?
The FDA recommends 15 business days.
Okay, so that's about 3 weeks.
Yes, and it's important to meet that deadline.
Why?
Well, because if you submit your response late, it might not be considered during the FDA's review process.
Okay, so they might already be writing you a warning letter.
Exactly. So don't delay. Get that response in as soon as possible.
Okay, and what happens if you don't submit an adequate response?
Well, the training materials are very clear about this.
Uh-oh.
Failure to respond adequately can lead to further regulatory action.
Okay, so that's bad.
That's bad. It means more scrutiny, more inspections, more problems.
Okay, so take the 483 seriously and respond appropriately.
Absolutely. It's not something you want to brush off.
Okay, so we've covered preparation, documentation, training, self-auditing, communication regarding potential findings. What about the actual interaction with the inspector during the inspection itself?
Ah, the main event.
Right. What are some key things to keep in mind?
Well, the Understanding FDA Inspections and Data transcript had some good insights on this.
Okay, let's hear it.
They emphasize that FDA inspections are designed to look at all aspects of your manufacturing operations.
Okay, so they're not just focused on one specific area.
No, they're looking at the big picture,
Okay.
and they're particularly interested in your quality system.
Right, because that's the foundation of everything.
Exactly. Your quality system is what governs all of your operations.
Okay. And they also mentioned that the FDA typically doesn't do paper audits before they come on site.
That's right. They're coming to see your operation in person.
Okay.
They want to observe your processes. They want to talk to your employees. They want to see how things are actually done.
So it's not just about checking boxes.
No, it's about understanding how your system functions in the real world.
Okay. And how do they decide which facilities to inspect?
Well, they use a risk-based approach.
Okay, so they're more likely to inspect facilities that have a history of problems. Expert.